Welcome to the Family Office Real Estate Institute. Today, we're going to be talking with Bruce Talley, and we're going to be talking about some international real estate in, I would say, one of the places in the world you probably wouldn't think about initially. So, Bruce, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first off, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, and then we'll get into the topic.
Okay, sure enough. I worked for an investment banking firm in California for many years. Sold, traded bond issues, municipal bond issues. California's got a very robust bond market with a lot of issuers, and eventually led West Coast sales there. And I developed a secondary book of business selling loan participations to community banks for Native American casinos, hotels, condo projects, that sort of thing. Still debt, but not securitized. Later on, I had this idea that subsequently was proven false, was that Russia was going to join the community of nations, be a responsible member, and that there was a big opportunity there. There's a big market. There was a chance, for Russia to become maybe something like Poland or the Czech Republic in the way that they've developed the rule of law and more democratic norms. And so I lived in Russia for about 10 years. I bought and sold commercial land in South Russia in a region called Krasnodar Krai. It's on the east side of the Black Sea, north of the Caucasus Mountains. Had some great results. Eventually, I developed what became Destination Sochi. The Olympics were coming to Russia, the Winter Olympics in 2014. So I started a company and didn't know anything about this industry at the time, but I started a company providing destination services for the Olympic broadcasters, partners, and sponsors that were going to come there. So we provided services from about 2011 to 2014, tours to begin with, events, later on, workforce relocation together with financial management of the contracts, TV studios, offices, warehouses, staffing, catering, laundry, transportation systems, everything you could think of. We had about 60 employees and became the largest company of our kind in Russia. And later on, I took that down to Brazil. And then I had subsequent business in both Korea and Japan. But in 2014, I was watching events in Ukraine closely. 2013, 2014, the Revolution of Dignity, the events on Independence Square in Kyiv. And the FSB, their internal security service, had spent about 5 years questioning me, following me, talking to me, interrogating me, everything you can think of, because they were suspicious that because I operated in a couple of regions that for them were somewhat sensitive, and they were concerned that perhaps I was working in the CIA. So I got a lot of scrutiny for years and years and years.
Have you read the book Red Notice?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Do you know Bill, brother?
I don't know him personally, no. But what he talked about was very familiar to me. I got a lot of scrutiny, on a different level than Bill, Mr. Browder. He was at that time was the largest foreign investor in Russia. And what was really impressive is how he built that company up. But none of that really surprised me. And I was living there during that period of time when Sergei Magnitsky was killed.
Yeah.
So none of that was particularly surprising. Anyway, I left in 2014. They asked my opinions about what was happening in Ukraine, and I made it really clear that I thought Ukraine should be able to make their own decisions without Russian interference. And it was just a matter of time from that moment on. I knew it was just a matter of time until they began to accuse Americans of espionage, drop a flash drive in their luggage or something like this. I knew it would happen. And somewhat locally, since I was somewhat prominent in South Russia, I used social media and video to get the word out. So I thought that I was somewhat of a target, and it was time to leave. So I left in 2014. Then in 2022, and I know you probably have questions about this. I'm sorry if I'm running on a little bit. But in 2022, immediately after Russia escalated the war that they began in 2014, I say immediately, within 4 or 5 weeks, I was in Ukraine. to learn what was going on. I knew a lot about Ukraine from my time in Russia. I'd been to Ukraine many, many times and was quite familiar with the country. So I've been initially, I took trauma kits and medical equipment, those kinds of things over. And I've been back very regularly since. I've started a company, Destination Ukraine, to provide destination services for the companies that relocate there. And I've also been working with investors on some projects. I've taken some tech investors over, land developers, a modular building company that's interested in setting up a factory. And then most specific to, our main topic, I'm partnered with Doug Clayton of Leopard Capital to launch a private real estate fund focused on residential in Ukraine.
Okay, so first off, let's talk about this destination services and company. Tell me a little bit more about what that looks like, what that involves. And yeah, because I would imagine it's the same thing in the different locations around the world, providing the same services. It's just that you're in a different location, right? So,
Yep.
what exactly is destination location assistance?
Great question. And it's one of those things that kind of slips under the radar and you don't really think about. Somebody else put the bee in my bonnet early in the Olympic cycle before Sochi. We were in Sochi, an American investor. We were looking around at some property, and he said, we were there when the bid was announced that the Russians had won for Sochi in 2014. And he looked around and he said, they're going to need so much. They're going to need porta potties. They're going to need all this. And it kind of put the bee in my bonnet. And so it's providing services. Really, for us, it's a turnkey service. So a company comes in, what do you do? Do you need offices? Do you need staffing? Do you need workforce relocation? What are the services? And we provided, a menu of services that they can pick and choose from what they need. And of course, with the Olympics, you've got a compressed time frame. And there are these technical companies that provide the services around the Olympics, the rigging, the lighting, the timing, the video screens, the broadcast systems, all of these systems. They require engineers. They require people building drywall, all of this kind of stuff to usually to finish out the broadcast center, for example. And so we would provide apartments that had to be fixed to their specifics in their contracts with their employees. And we provided, not only did we provide the apartments, but we also paid for them. So we paid the taxes, the rent, utility, the Wi-Fi, everything like that. So it's kind of a turnkey service. They would come. We have folks, they need to get to work. They need laundry. They need breakfast, like that. And then later when the broadcasters showed up, it was similar, more intense. They might need a TV studio. Or security and staffing and interpreters and maybe events, catering, all this kind of thing. So really it's problem solving. And of course, Ukraine is going to be faced with a very, very large reconstruction project. And so there'll be a lot of companies that will need similar services. It's kind of the same thing. Maybe they'll need work permits and building permits. Maybe they want to buy a building. They need workforce relocation. They need interpreters. They need legal. They need staffing. They might need security, transportation, all of these kinds of services. So it's kind of soup to nuts, but not every company needs each one of those services. So they're free to pick and choose. And so we're a very reliable service. I've done this now in multiple countries and have the systems in place and the people in place that can speak virtually every Indo-European language and a number of the East Asian ones as well. So,
well, I'll tell you so I went over to Russia for the first time probably 5-6 years ago, maybe it was, and my expectation was much different, more so of what you see in the movies. And I didn't realize how much of an international city it is, how clean it was, and how nice it was. I mean, it was a great experience. The one thing that I I continue to remember, and it comes to my mind all the time, is seeing buildings that have scaffolds that they're working on in the city, and then they'll put this drape sort of over the side of it that makes it look like the building, and it's
Yes.
so clean. And I'm like, New York should be doing that, because they don't do anything like that. And it was really I thought that was fascinating. My friend that I went over to see there, he right when the Russia and Ukraine war happened, he just left. He left everything behind, and all his stuff, everything in his apartment, and just off he went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of folks did that. I know some people that have left Russia because of moral opposition to invading Ukraine and killing people and trying to take their land. You're right, though. Moscow is a big, fun, fast, exciting city. There are a few places in the world like it. St. Petersburg is really a beautiful place as well. But if you get out into provincial Russia, you see that the vast majority of all the wealth, all the power, the cultural, whatever's happening cultural is concentrated in those cities. And so there's a big, big drop off in standards of living. There are a couple of other cities that are doing relatively well: Krasnodar, Sochi, Nizhny Novgorod, Novosibirsk, which I actually don't know. There's some other cities, but a lot of the provincial areas are really, really struggling, and I understand even more so now during this period of the war. So Moscow is a great city. There's no question about it. But you get 100 kilometers out of that city, and you're going back many, many years in time and in lifestyle
Which is
and
probably more of what I was expecting,
yeah,
going on the outside. So we know that the war has been going on for a while now in Ukraine. We don't really see anything that's sort of stopping, immediately, at least. And at least what is portrayed across the media, and I know it differs based upon what media platform you're listening to, not only US but globally, is that there's a lot of buildings that have been just taken out, aren't there? A lot of there, which is going to need the construction and everything else. And so, and the bombing is continuing to happen. So how did you come about looking at building apartments in the Ukraine?
yeah. Well, we're not going to build where we want to buy new apartments or near new in prime districts, and also renovate in historic center. Buy apartments that are in great locations and need that. But to answer your question, um, I looked at doing a lot of different things in Russia, and as I said, I bought and sold some land. And at the end of the day, the investment that would have worked the best or did work the best is simply buying apartments. Moscow, or apartments in Moscow have went up between 2000 and 2020 about 1,200%. So there's a 12 times increase in value. And that's pretty tremendous. And it's continued. And so the average price of an apartment in Moscow right now, new build, is about $25,000 per square, 25,000 euros per square meter. So that's more than just an average. That's almost $3,000 a square foot. And that's average. And some of them are 40 or 50,000 euros per square meter. So, and that's with the ruble declining about 60%. So I was sure starting in about 2023 that real estate or residential real estate was really a good option in Ukraine, because prices are between 6 and 10 or 12 times less in Kyiv, Lviv, and Odessa than they are in Russia. Now, Ukraine and Russia have some differences, but there are some similarities in culture, in business systems, in legal systems. and also in the infrastructure and how people move around. And those cities were not built with, big freeways funneling folks in and out. So locations are always important, but I think even more so in a lot of these post-Soviet capitals. Both Kyiv and Moscow have got about 20% of their respective nations' gross domestic product. So I believe that residential is really, really undervalued. And
And
I'm
you're talking about not apartment buildings, but individual units,
right.
like,
And
like
here's the
condos, like
yeah.
condos here in the U.S.
Yeah,
basically.
we would call them condos here in the US. Here's the difference is that about 70 to probably north of 80% of the folks that live in Kyiv live in apartments, and they typically own them, right? So the premise is that when an apartment building is built, you don't have an owner of a multifamily project who's, like Fairfield or some other company that builds or buys a 400 unit apartment complex and then leases them all out. Typically speaking, in fact, I can't think of a single contrary example in several decades of looking at this in Russia or Ukraine, where there's an owner that rents an entire building out. They build a building, and during the process of building it, they sell the units out. And the closer it gets to final construction, to the construction being completed, the higher the price. So earlier on, you're taking a greater risk, you get a price advantage. And so what that does for us is that it allows us to buy in a number of different locations in or buildings. And you touched on the damage, and it's true. There has been extensive hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage, but it tends to be concentrated more in the east of the country. Now, if you watch the news, there are nightly attacks on Kyiv and Odessa, to lesser extent Lviv, but the number of damaged or destroyed apartments in these cities is less than 1%. So while I don't mean to minimize the human cost and the terrible tragedy, that's a lot of homes still. I think it's 5 or 6,000 in Kyiv out of a total apartment stock of over 800,000. So we
Yeah.
feel that by being in different districts and different buildings, that we're achieving enough diversification that that kind of loss is not catastrophic.
Back in 2003, I here in the States, I put together what was going to be the first single family REIT. And so part of my research was, who's doing what. And I remember there was another number of companies that I ran across in Europe that would either buy the floor, right? They weren't buying the buildings, or they'd buy individual units, just like you're talking about, and they would aggregate them, together. And that's what it sounds like, and similar, right? Just
Yeah, exactly.
putting.
There are, as you point out, there are great historical precedents in Poland and the Czech Republic. There are other companies that have done this exact thing in the post-EU accession environment. They bought a number of apartments, aggregated it, sold it to an investor, pension fund, insurance company, or somebody that wants to own,
So
multi.
so oh, a couple questions. So is your exit strategy to sell it as a portfolio or individually?
That's right. We think that we're convinced that the similar kinds of folks in Europe, especially that are buying those portfolios in Poland and Hungary and Czech Republic and then the Baltics, we think that they're our customers. There's value in having a sizable portfolio of apartments spread across 3 cities with excellent returns. And of
No.
course, you achieve some economies, right? If you sell it offshore, there are advantages. The money stays in the country, right? And it's obviously less costly from a time and sales perspective as well, if you're selling one by one as opposed to the whole portfolio.
Now, when I lived in Vietnam, there was an issue having to do with ownership, and that happens in a number of countries, right? Where there has to be, you have to have a partner, either to do business to be there, right? Or ownership has to be a certain percentage, 5149. Can foreigners purchase these properties, or do you actually need a partner?
That's a great point, and that's, I know that that's the case in a number of countries, especially in Southeast Asia. In Ukraine, you can hold an apartment as a foreigner. We'll have an onshore company or companies that own the apartments. We don't have to have a we don't have to split ownership in that way. So. Um, but it's an excellent question, and one of the reasons why I believe this is so attractive is that it's a great store of wealth. The law works very well for buying and selling apartments in Ukraine. It's where people that have money put it. It's a store of value. They can live in it. They can rent it out. And there's a lot more trust in property than there are in the securities markets. So the law works really well for buying and selling and renting apartments in Ukraine. And the contracts, our plan, we will buy these apartments, rent them out. And then as the Ukrainian economy grows, eventually it accedes to the EU, property values and rents are going to rise. But the great situation here is that all the contracts are in hryvnia but pegged to the dollar, so we're not taking a currency risk.
What Okay, let's say that Russia does take over Ukraine. Ukraine says fine or whatever, not fine, but I mean they end up including it in their, you know, as part of their part of Russia, right?
Yeah,
Which he's trying to do, I believe. And so, how would that impact everything that you're working on?
well, I fear it would be, a catastrophe for not just us, but the Ukrainians. And so I don't think that is a risk. I don't think it's a particularly strong risk. In nearly 4 years of war, they haven't really gained much territory from what they were controlling in 2022. So I don't believe that there's a high likelihood that they'll be in Kyiv, Odessa, and or Lviv. I just don't think that it's a risk, but I think a relatively low percentage, like low single digits, that they get to those cities. There's still a number, uh, all these cities are some distance away from the front lines. The Russians haven't been able to cross the Dnieper at Kherson since 2000. I can't remember what it was, 2022 or 2023 when they pushed them back across the river. So that's the closest. And when you're in Odessa, we were in Odessa at the end of August and early September. It's really interesting because people are living, working, vacationing, getting married, other than, and again, not to minimize the human tragedy here, but they're building apartments right now in every one of these cities, significant numbers. Now the construction has dropped off to about 45% of pre-war levels. But if you and I went there now, I could show you a number of buildings that are in Odessa that are being constructed. And so I think that that's a risk, but I think it's more than priced into the discount.
The What's the chance, or how much, how close has Russia gotten to the city center?
In 2022, they were at an airstrip just outside of Kyiv, and there were a lot of atrocities committed in Irpin and Bucha, which are uh, suburbs of Kyiv. So they were relatively close at that point in time, but they haven't been anywhere near there since then. Right now, they're hundreds of miles away. Now, if you go to Kharkiv, which is, I don't know, maybe it's 350 miles east of Kyiv, I should know exactly. They're not too far away from there. And I've been in Kharkiv. Kharkiv was the second largest city and really sustained a lot of damage. So, you know, one of the things that people tend to think of is, well, these European countries aren't so big. Well, Ukraine's sizable. It's almost the size of Texas. So what happens in El Paso, um, there's quite a bit of difference between El Paso and Houston, for example. You know, I think that's what we're talking about. In Lviv, I believe out of a housing stock of about 280,000 apartments has sustained about 200 that have been lost or severely damaged. So that's a pretty small percentage. We're less than 1% in Kyiv. Uh, my best count in Odessa is about 1,200 apartments out of about 380,000. And I think that the vast majority of the damage that's happened in this war has already happened. So, yeah, undoubtedly a risk, but we think that the prices more than compensate for what that risk is, and that most of the damage in the major cities has already happened.
So when did you start thinking about this thesis?
2023 is when it really came home to me because I was looking around at these apartments and thinking, gosh, you know, they're so inexpensive. And I watched apartments just skyrocket in Russia over the last several decades, despite the fact, and even now, prices are very high, despite the fact the ruble's down, you know, 60% from pre-2022 levels. So despite all that, apartments are very, very expensive there. And I think that there's a great case to be made that Odessa is a more attractive place than Sochi. I lived in Sochi for a number of years, but they've got this beautiful historic center. They got sandy beaches. It's the major seaport for the country. Historic city center with architecture that, you know, is quite beautiful. Kyiv, I believe, is going to be the cool city in the coming decade. You know, what Berlin has been, what Barcelona was, you know, what London is on and off as, you know, the center for digital nomads and for young people and people that want to experience a fun cosmopolitan lifestyle. I think Kyiv is going to be the hot city in the decades to come.
Because that also is based upon the war, right? And how things shake out.
Yes, yes. But the war will end. And what that looks like exactly, anyone, I don't know, but Russia is so far from Kyiv right now. Yes, they're lobbing missiles in there, but if, and I compare it to cities in the West, and you know this, you know, you have cities that have had tremendous damage from fires
Or hurricanes.
or hurricanes. And so, I mean, people hear war and they think everything in Ukraine looks like Bakhmut. And again, not to underplay the damage and the human tragedies. And you can hardly talk to anybody in Ukraine without hearing about one of these. But the damage in Bakhmut is entirely different than what it is in Lviv. Lviv is only about, I think it's around 50, 60 miles to the Polish border. And there's a lot of talk in Ukraine that there will be a great deal of infrastructure constructed around Lviv, a ring road, a new airport, new roads heading to the 8 Polish-Ukrainian border crossings. And with labor costs that are only about a quarter of what they are in Poland, Ukraine is likely to become a manufacturing hub for Europe, as is Moldova. Costs are so much lower there. And as it accedes to the EU, I think that's just going to happen. So Lviv is a beautiful Austro-Hungarian city. I think it's also going to be attractive for expats and then companies setting up manufacturing. There are a number of companies already, kicking the tires. South Koreans are over there. There are a couple of very attractive business parks outside Lviv that the Ukrainian government is giving tax benefits to. So, I mean, they're not just in the Lviv area. There are around 120, I think, of them have been identified nationwide. But there are so many things that Ukraine has going for it. Lower labor costs, 25% of the world's best soil, black earth, more than any other country on earth. So you've got agriculture. Of course, the rare earths have been talked about extensively, and manufacturing. And then you've got an educated and sophisticated labor force, particularly in IT.
which is a big thing, right? I mean
Big thing.
that's why people will go from part of the world to a different part of the world when there's economics can make better sense, right?
Yep.
Especially if they can get, personnel. I'll tell you, my friend had lived in probably 8, 9 different countries around the world. He worked for Colgate, and he said the best employees he ever had, the smartest, was in Russia, actually.
Yeah, both countries have a lot of talented folks. Of course, a lot of those folks left Russia because of their opposition to the war or not wanting to be personally involved. But yeah, Ukraine has got a lot of talented folks. And the other thing that we see is that probably Ukraine is going to become a hub for defense manufacturing because they're at the forefront. They're the leaders in drone technology right now. And yes. And so you see around Uzhgorod, which is along on the Slovakian border, you see a number of pharmaceutical and especially defense companies have set up production there because I don't think there's been any damage in Uzhgorod, or it's minimal from the war.
Wow. So where are you in the process with this strategy that we're talking about?
Yeah, we're in fund formation. We're looking for limited partners. We have a website up, ukraine-capital.com. Important to note that my discussion is not a offer to buy or sell securities. That's only done through legal means, as you know. But we're in that process, and we're really excited. It's some folks just hear war and gosh, but there are a lot of people that understand that post-conflict environments, this is so unique because at some point, we will enter a post-conflict environment. The other thing that's unique is that Ukraine is almost certainly going to join the EU. They are on fast track.
Huh.
France, Germany, Sweden, Poland are all big supporters of this. And then there's this wall of money that's going to hit Ukraine. So all of these factors make for a once in a generation or maybe once in a lifetime repricing of residential real estate.
What about debt? Where are you going to get the debt from? And how much leverage can you actually get?
We're still working that out, but our numbers are, even without leverage, are very, very attractive. So initially, we're not planning on leverage.
Oh, really? So you're going 100% in.
Yeah.
Okay.
That may change as we get there, but at this moment, we don't need leverage to have excellent returns.
Well, so unlevered, what type of returns are you projecting?
I, I got to be careful if
What's the potential of
well,
of middle of the road?
yeah. Well, if you just look at our peer markets, Moscow apartments on average are around 8 times in price what they are in Kyiv. If you look at Odessa right now, you can buy quality apartments for either unfinished because they deliver them without floor and wall coverings and kitchens and bathrooms. But they're cheaper in Odessa. And you can buy apartments there unfinished for around 1,000, maybe $1,500 a square meter, which is somewhere less than 100 to maybe $1,300 a square foot, or $100 to $130 a square foot. Those apartments are in Sochi. They might be between $5,000 and $6,000 a square meter, up to $25,000 or $30,000 a square meter. So you're looking at 5, 6, 8, 10 times higher prices. And we think that those are the reference points because of the similarities in infrastructure, in where money goes, how the laws work in terms of transferring real estate. So there's going to be a big, big re-rating. If you look at what happened in Estonia, for example, they had multiple years where residential exceeded 30% growth per annum. in the 2 years before joining the EU and the 2 years after. Same thing in Poland and the Czech Republic. So 30% annual returns for those years are not, there's a precedent for it for countries that they had what they call the Big Bang in 2004, and 10 countries joined the EU, and there were subsequently big uplifts in residential prices. So I'm not promising returns here, but if you look at the historical precedent,
it's like anytime you're in a distress or of any sorts. I mean, we're going into distress specifically in multifamily, as well. So that's where opportunities come from. And so, just like you said, when it's fires or hurricanes, so it makes sense, right? As long as there's that fundamental to come out of it.
Yeah, and I really think that the risk for fires or hurricanes are a good analog. I mean, there are people that in the Midwest will say, "Oh, why would you do anything in Florida because of the hurricanes?" Or "Why would you do anything in Colorado or California because of the wildfires?" Well, things are happening. People are still living in those places. So I think there's a big opportunity, and I think that with manufacturing, with agriculture, with defense, with the wall of money that's going to hit Ukraine, with the law working very well for exchanging apartments, I think that we're simply the first ones there, and in a few years there are going to be a lot of other folks that are
well, that's good too, because that could be part of an exit strategy, right? If some people are coming in and you're not taking the full upside, but still you're taking an awful nice upside, right?
Right.
And you have that liquidity component. So, Bruce, usually when we talk about things here on the show, we really get into exactly what we're talking about from an educational perspective as well. But I do want you to mention your website again, because to me this is just so fascinating, and it's one of those you don't hear much of it, right? But it makes a lot of sense in many regards.
Yeah, it's Ukraine-capital.com. So you can go there and find our contact information. And my partner on this, the CEO, in fact, of Ukraine Capital, is Doug Clayton. And so he is, I've got a lot of experience in post-Soviet markets, and Doug has got a great deal of experience in private equity. He raised and managed funds for Leopard Capital in Cambodia and Haiti, and has a lot of experience in frontier markets. So, I think it's a good team.
Well, good. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for being on the show, and would love to have you back, because to hear how things are progressing and what's happening, because it's nice to hear that there's some positive things in many regards that are happening, in Ukraine. If other companies or countries are starting to come in, obviously they're looking to help out in some capacity, obviously. But thanks so much for being on the show. I want you to stick around for a minute here after we finish up. But yeah, keep us posted as you go, okay?
I'll absolutely do it. Thank you for having me on. In closing, I'd just like to say that Ukrainians are very resilient people. I think it's a human quality, and people are getting up and they're going to work and they're building apartments and they're, manufacturing drones and they're planting their crops, and they're doing this under tremendous pressure. I hope the United States helps more than we have been recently. But there are other companies and other folks looking around, and now is the time to get involved. I really think so. Yeah.
Yeah, but especially from a contrarian perspective, for sure.
Yeah.
So, all right, Bruce, thanks so much, and keep us posted, and we'll have you on again, okay?
Thank you. I'll do it.